Welcome to Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures, with thought leader and award-winning author Yvette Bethel. This podcast provides you with insights and ideas you can use to reinvent your culture through trust and the principles of interconnectivity, flow, and balance. At a time when the world is rewriting the rules of work, traditional leadership practices are not enough. It's time to perceive persistent challenges through a new lens. It's time to evolve.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again. This is your host, Yvette Bethel, and the topic for this episode of Evolve is the power of unlearning. And we have with us again, welcome back, Rick, CEO, CFO, and executive coach, Rick Yvanovich. As I said the last time, Rick is based in Switzerland after being in Vietnam for 34 years. He's a master franchiser of the New Orleans-based coffee chain, PJ's Coffee. So welcome again, Rick. We love having you back with us at Evolve.
Thank you, Yvette. Thank you for letting me come back.
Oh, we really want to hear, based on the last time, you have so much wisdom to share, so we want to hear some more. Rick, I recently read a Harvard Business Review article by Mark Bonchak, and he said that the problem isn't learning, it's unlearning. In every aspect of business, we're operating with mental models that have grown outdated or obsolete, from strategy to marketing to organization to leadership. To embrace a new logic of value creation, we have to unlearn the old one. Rick, tell us about what you think about this statement and how you got interested in unlearning.
It's a good concept. I personally, I don't think I've read that article. Unlearning is very, very important. I think the most demonstrable example of why we need to unlearn is the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. Because it was such a black swan event. It was so out there. There is no playbook. Nobody's got a playbook for it. It's not something that you learn in school or business school or wherever you learned. You're not taught how to deal with this. And one of the challenges I think we've all faced with is, with all that uncertainty, that there was nothing to fall back on. All right. Now, to try and say, hey, it's the same as something else, and just try and follow a model or a way of doing that we were used to because we've always been doing it, in most cases, it didn't really work very well. And so I think that is the most vivid example to me of why we need to unlearn things. Or rather, I think what it highlighted was, we don't know how to deal with this situation. So trying to deal with this, as if it's something else, or to try and use a tried and trusted way to solve the issue, maybe isn't the best idea. Some people tried and failed. So yeah, I believe that we need to unlearn stuff.
Or people who think, you know what, the pandemic was a once-in-a-lifetime kind of event. What would you say to them about unlearning in the context in the aftermath of the pandemic?
Okay, people said it was a once-in-a-lifetime event. Okay, it was a pandemic. It's not the first time a pandemic's hit the planet. Okay, maybe not in our lifetimes, but in someone else's lifetime. So, this kind of stuff or something cataclysmic like that has happened before. But just because something is so out there, so unconventional, so different, is not an excuse to sort of ignore it. The pandemic was yes, it was a bit different, shall we say? But if we look at what's happened after the pandemic, yeah, I know on our last interview, I talked a little bit about the pandemic, which did, it birthed the book title of the book that I wrote called Business as Unusual. And I was trying to say that, or I said at the time that I was getting fed up during the pandemic of people say, when this is all over, when we get back to normal. And I was saying, well, we're not going to go back to normal. Everything is, unusual. It's business as unusual, not business as usual. And since the pandemic, there's been shock after shock after shock. There have been multiple wars, or whatever people want to call them. We had the Russia-Ukraine one, which is still ongoing. Now we have these issues in the Middle East. There's another one going. Nobody had imagined that. All right. We have all these geopolitical tensions. We've had, natural disasters as well. Many, many things keep on happening. Now, on a man-made thing, we have this generative AI, all right, which has led to some movements in headcount in some companies, shall I say. Some have rapidly, tried to acquire more expertise in that other area. Others are using it as an excuse to let people go. These are all very, very unusual things. And it sort of really highlights that we live in this constantly evolving world. I'll call it evolving because that sounds positive. Evolving, changing world. There's unusual stuff. It's only unusual because we haven't come across it before. But the pace of technological change and just things that is happening across the world there seems to be more and more unusual stuff going on. So we need to get used to it. And because it's unusual, we maybe have never come across it before. So what is our business model if we get hit with that? Or what is our model to, or formula to get out of whatever the situation is? Since these are all new situations, it doesn't mean that the tried and tested models and the way that we used to do things, and we've maybe done them for decades, it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll work. I'm not saying that they won't work. I'm just saying there's no guarantee that they will work. And in the event that they don't work, well, we have to put them aside and find something else very quickly. So to that extent, we need to, you can call it unlearning, or you can look at it from a different perspective, is we need to improve it. We need to improve the model. If it is not as working as well as it used to, we have to make some changes, right?
When you talk about unlearning, what exactly do you mean?
Unlearning is I mentioned generative AI. Okay. Prior to generative AI, if we're going to do some research, we're going to go onto Google, all right, and we're going to put in a couple of search strings and try and find out what it is that we wanted to find out. Okay, that's what we would usually do. It's very, very automatic. We don't even have to think about it. We don't know the answer to something, go Google it, go look it up, go research it, right? With generative AI, it's sort of turbocharged. Okay. We can ask generative AI, if we prompt it right, the same type of query in a generative AI prompt format. And we're not just going to get a couple of things. We can get our entire research written for us. So something that might have taken someone hours or days to put together can today be done in less than a day or even less than an hour. So what are we going to do? Are we going to continue doing things the way that we used to do them, or are we going to change how we do things? And to that extent, it is a matter of unlearning, because a lot of what we do by habit. You know, we're taught that, hey, we need to have good habits or better habits. So replace bad habits with better habits, good habits. And it's not just for personal health, but it's, you know, just normal behavior, how we work, how we interact. Okay. And the thing is with a habit is if we've made it very, very automatic, if it no longer serves us, we have to try and unlearn it somehow. We need to replace it. Okay. Now, there are a few ways of doing that. One of them is really to try and stop doing it and just replace it with something else. Another one is to try and modify what we're doing. So going back to your question, like, what is unlearning to me? Unlearning is really changing our perspective on something. Okay, I think, you know, things should be done in a sequence A, B, C, and I'm doing it very, very automatically. And then I find that there's a better way of doing it. Don't have to go A, B, C. I can now go A, C, and drop the B step. Okay. However, I may be so used to doing the 3 steps, I keep on doing 3 steps. All right. So I have to unlearn that and replace it with only 2 steps. So you can call it unlearning. You can call it fine-tuning and finding a better way. You can call it, you know, changing the process. But to all intents and purposes, yeah, it's changing how we do things and unlearning the old way and learning the new way.
When it comes to unlearning, there is the process approach to it. But there's also what we call mental models. And they're driven by beliefs, assumptions, values, things like that. And I'd be interested to know what you think are some of the outdated or no longer useful mental models that show up, that get in the way of the change, of learning, because there's some depth to the old way of doing things, and buy in. They've already bought into it.
Yeah. That's a great point that you've raised. Unlearning can be, it might not just be a process, it can also be linked to what we truly believe. Okay. Now, why do we believe what we believe? Maybe we were taught it. All right. In a lot of ways, in a lot of cases that we were taught it. Okay. What's an example? In school, I remember being taught about the solar system and the planets. And the planet called, wasn't it, Pluto, which was a planet, okay? Which recently they discovered, well, it's not quite a planet, is it? It's a something else. We were told that certain foods are good for us. And then we were told that the same foods are bad for us. Okay. Now, depending on what the food is, you could have spent decades being told as a kid in school and parents and everyone around you, you must eat this because it's very good for you. And then now someone has done some research says, no, you shouldn't eat that because it's actually really bad for you. Okay. And then a few years later, it's suddenly good for you. And a few years later, it's suddenly bad for you. It happens, right? But these are sort of challenge, these things are sort of challenging our beliefs. We actually really, 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 really believe that something is the way it should be, and in our minds is absolutely right. And then something happens, and that whole correctness, or even that whole idea of ours is really challenged, it's shattered. Okay. I mean, the world used to be flat until they realized it was a globe. There's so many instances of this. And trying to change what we believe is another aspect of unlearning. But I'd say it's easier to unlearn a bit of a habit, or a bit of a process, than it is to unlearn or change a belief. And we believe what we believe. I mean, we might have learned it. It could have been educated into us. It could have been beaten into us, literally.
Yes.
So to change something so deep-rooted, we really, really would need to be heavily convinced. Okay. And again, depending on our own individual characters, some of us find that harder than others.
Give an example of how these deep-rooted mental models get into the change process. I think I've seen in some organizations where changes are implemented and people go through the motions. And at the surface level, it sounds like they made a change. It looks like they made a change, but somehow they integrated the change into the previous way of doing things. And so the old way continues to live, but it sounds like and sometimes looks like something else, but it feels the same. So, and so the artifacts appear to have changed, but the deeper components of the culture remain the same, and the deeper components of the change, nothing really changed in the end except on the surface. So, what's your experience of this? And because a lot of times this is driven by the assumptions and beliefs and core values of people that have not been addressed. And they're holding on to the old way because, as you correctly said, they feel that it's the right way.
Yeah, I think what you're explaining there is, in many cases, people just toe the line. Okay, they're paying lip service to something, but fundamentally, whatever was supposed to change didn't actually change. All right. And when it comes to companies, we're really talking about culture. So trying to do a cultural change in a company and then people paying lip service to it. We can see that by seeing how people really behave when no one's looking. That will be the litmus test. Or as we see that, some corporations try and drive cultural change by putting a nice poster on the wall saying whatever it is they believe. And people say they believe it because they can remember what it said on the wall, but they don't actually believe it in the slightest.
That's the difference between living values and espoused ones.
Yes, and I think again, this is all I suppose, linked to change management is if we want something to change and we're expecting people to change, then we need to really take the time to explain to people the why behind it, what we are trying to achieve, why we need to do it, and support people with that change. Some people may be very, very, very open to that change, and other people may be very, very resistive to that change. That's two different, in that example, that's two completely different mindsets, two completely different types of people. And therefore, we need two completely different types of communication support to facilitate the change. We can't do one size fits all, because none of us are average, or what we are. So things need to be tailored to facilitate change. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen.
You mentioned culture just now, and this is a quote or a statement that I've heard many times, that culture eats strategy for lunch. And when you're putting a strategic change in place, I think that's what I was trying to say, where the culture will literally eat it.
Yeah. So I mean, in that, we start talking about strategy and things, and potential change. Let's say a change in direction. People really have to buy into it.
Yeah.
Okay. To do that, people have to believe in it, and we need to do whatever we need to do to make people believe in it. Not just make them, but do things in a way that people can actually see that is the way that we need to go. They completely on board with it, and they understand the why.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about making them.
And they buy into it.
Yes.
Now, it may well be that we can't get everybody to buy in the why, and the why disagrees with some people. They just don't agree with it. Well, then it becomes a more challenging thing, one could say. Because as well, if an organization, we're going in this direction and that's supported by our culture to do that, then from a different perspective, we're saying if someone's not willing to go in that direction, does that mean that they're not really embracing the culture of the organization? And if they're not embracing the culture of the organization, does that mean they're really not a very good cultural fit? And if they're not a very good cultural fit for the organization, are we doing that individual or the organization the right service if they remain in the organization?
But is
it time to part ways?
But is that line of thought always the case? Because sometimes when people resist, there may be something that they are sensing attention in the organization, or that the change is creating, that needs to be brought to the surface. And it's not that they're personally resisting. It may be that they're raising a concern that needs to be addressed so that the change can happen. I think sometimes we read the original resistance as a full-on, hardcore resistance, but sometimes they have a legitimate concern that needs to be addressed. And it's not that they don't agree, but with the whole thing, they probably don't agree that it'll work this way.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why the right conversations need to happen. There's nothing wrong with the resistance, but it's understanding why there is resistance. So, I mean, if you're in the senior, leadership team and you're trying to do something and there's all this resistance, well, why is there resistance? Is there a valid reason for it? Have something been missed? Is that group of people or that team or that division, is there a different perspective that we have not considered? Or alternatively, have we not explained it to match, their perspective? Because just saying it one way isn't exactly going to work for everyone if what we're trying to do is relatively complex.
Right.
It might be obvious at a very senior level of what is going on and what we're trying to do, because we might have been talking about it and strategizing it for a long time, and then we're just hitting people with it. This is what we're doing, people. And it's a bit of a surprise. Maybe they don't have the context. It's quite a hard thing for people to understand. So, it behooves us as organizations to help people make the transformation, to help people understand. Because if they don't understand, well, we don't actually want them to blindly follow. Because again, if people are just blindly follow and they're not really knowing why they're doing it, when push comes to shove, as it were, maybe they're not fully vested in it, and then things will fall apart.
And we will be right back after this message.
Organizational Soul is a mission-driven organization and network where we specialize in trust in academia, families, and organizations. We are building a community of leaders who are interested in trust and culture. If you are interested in our updates, you can sign up for our newsletter at orgsoul.com. As a thank you for joining our community, you can access our free resources that are designed to help you build your brand as a trusted leader as you contribute to safe space. Sign up now at orgsoul.com.
With us today is CEO, CFO, and executive coach, Rick Yvanovich. Welcome back to Evolve, and welcome back to the next segment. So, Rick, when leaders think about learning, they don't typically consider unlearning. What does an unlearning process look like? And which activities you talked earlier about, stop doing something and replace it with something, or modifying something, but there's a process. How do organizations bring this into their organizational system so that there's not only a learning and development system, but maybe there's an unlearning system that's implemented?
It's a very, very good question. One approach to it, or should we say an approach that I take, is to not really talk about unlearning, but more facilitate the fact that people need to unlearn, but they don't actually realize that they're doing it. On the one hand, you could say that unlearning sounds a bit negative, doesn't it? Hey, you know how to do things, but we need you to unlearn how to do things and do them, in a different way. So is that implying that the way that you're doing it is wrong? So that's what I don't like about when we look at unlearning in that way, like, hey, something is wrong, it doesn't work, we need to do it better. I prefer to look at it from the more innovative way, a more, shall we say, exploratory way. We've been doing things, however we've been doing things, but given that we've been doing it this way for a long time and we are really good at it, we must be really experienced at it, surely we can come up with one teeny tiny idea to make it better, based on all our huge amount of experience of having done it. So let's look for those small improvements. Let's be more exploratory about it. Let's be more curious about it. Let's see how we can make things, do things faster or better or more efficient or more effective. To do that, we are going to be looking for ways to do that. And by doing that, it will likely result in we're going to change what we're doing, and stop doing some of the steps that we're doing and replace them with other new and better steps, which yield the better result that we were after. So that's one aspect, I would always advocate to explore, be curious, innovate, tinker, try, improve, fine tune. Okay. And therefore, I like it when people are constantly seeking or providing ideas or thinking about how to improve things. And by doing that, they're always trying to like move things forward, as it were. And I feel that by doing that, they are learning new things and working out new solutions and letting go of other things. You have to let go of the old process for the new process that you've just come up with. You can call that unlearning if you want.
From a mental model perspective, what would you suggest there in terms of what kind of system would be the best or approach? So if they're changing their assumptions, their core values, their beliefs, what would help with that from your experience?
For an individual, let's go back to the individual. For an individual to change a core value or a core belief that they've had for a while, there has to be something very, very, very tangible to make them do that. Okay, so are they to let go of an existing core value? One would need to look at, does it still serve us? I could say myself that my core value is X, whatever that is. Is it really my core value, or am I just saying it? And let's pretend I really, really am embracing it. Is it serving me? Is it getting me to where I want to go, or is it getting me into more trouble and putting me in the wrong direction? Because sometimes, we might adopt a core value or a core belief that really doesn't serve us very well. And I guess maybe we need to fall flat on our face to realize that, oops, I need to do something. Because if it's something that we really, really, truly believe in, we're maybe blinkered or blind, or we're closing our ears to what's actually happening. But the red flags might be there, and you may need to temper or tone down your core value if it's causing issues.
I think too sometimes people just need to see the new approach or the new way of being through the same core value lens. Sometimes they have only one perspective of how that core value applies.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes it's just a matter of helping them to see that the core value is still relevant. So sometimes it's because a lot of times, as you said in the beginning, people are not always willing to change what's core to who they are. But certainly people do things like value stacking, where certain other core values take precedence in situationally, So there may be different ways that they can address it.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing about core values, I mean, I made it personal core values. Maybe that was a disingenuous answer, because a lot of people don't know what their values are.
Yes, that's true too. Exactly.
Okay. So one of the issues is, if you don't know what your values are, if you can't actually explain them, then what are they? Do you actually have them? Or do you just have a collection of beliefs that becomes very situational and it becomes a bit wishy-washy? But that's no different to an organization having a bunch of values which are ill-defined. And guess what? They become pretty wishy-washy as well. They become meaningless. So as individuals, do our own core values or the lack of them, is that the problem? It might be. And how can you change a core value if you had never stated them in the first place? So if you weren't sure of them in the first place and you're trying to change your belief in something, if you haven't really reflected on it much or deeply enough, you don't really know how important it is to you. So it can become situational. You might just be in an argument about something. Okay, but the next day or something, like, what were we arguing about? Why was I getting on my high horse about whatever?
Tell us about a time when you would have guided a team through an unlearning process, and you've mentioned different components of that process already. But give us an anecdote so they can link all of the parts together.
Okay. Well, the one that I think that may be affecting a lot of people these days is there's this concept that when we go to school, we're taught stuff, okay? And this is my past. We're taught stuff and we're told that, hey, you need to learn this, okay? Because if you learn this and get the right grades, you can get into the right university with the right degree and get the right job, and you're set up for life. Or another myth is you learn this, you do all these years of study at school and whatever, and that's all you need to know. Or you join the organization and these organizations, your company has money and they're there to train you, to give you the skills that you need. All three of them are myths. All three of them are myths. Come on, we know in the education system, okay, some of them are getting a little bit better these days. In order to change a curriculum in a university could take as much as a decade. It takes a long time.
That's true.
And so by the time you graduate or get out of school, whatever, the knowledge that you know is no longer relevant within a year or so. Or even it wasn't within a day, it's no longer relevant, because that's not what companies want. About 5 or 6, or might have been 7 years ago, I remember doing some talks and quoting LinkedIn, who said that the speed of change of knowledge was such that anything that you know today is going to be out of date in 18 months' time. And that was 7 years or maybe a decade ago. The speed of change of information now is so vast that literally what we know today, maybe it's going to be out of date within the year. I remember when generative AI first came out, when ChatGPT first came out, and the other ones first came out. That's 18 months or so ago now. I remember I enrolled on a 6-month AI mastery course. It was like 50 sessions, 2 hours each, twice a week. And I was, like 11 o'clock till 1 a.m. in the morning. I thought I really, really got a grasp of this, and I did it. And I knew all about AI and how to use literally so many of these tools. And within months, it was common knowledge, okay? Because it's going so fast that literally everything I learn has already been replaced. Okay, so that
now or chat at this point.
yeah. I mean, it's going super, super, super fast. And anyway, you asked me for examples. I'll go on to that last example. That last example, which didn't used to be a myth, but needs to be a myth. And that is, your company will teach you. There's nothing wrong with that. Companies are teaching you. But the companies, by doing that, have inadvertently, accidentally made us dependent on the company. And they've done themselves a disservice. Because basically what that's saying is you just need to wait for the company to train you, and the company will spoon feed you the knowledge and skills that you need. What a load of rubbish. Okay. What a recipe for absolute failure. Okay. Things are moving so fast now. And I came across this as well because I saw people waiting to be trained on something like generative AI when, well, who's going to train you when it's so new that there are no books, there's nothing on this. So what, you're going to wait 6 months or a year? I know people only now enrolling onto courses like 18 months after it's happened, so that, the train's left the station a long time ago. And even what they learn now is going to be out of date in 6 months to a year. So the key thing is again, we have to let go of that belief that someone is going to spoon feed us. Someone is going to help us. Okay. And I believe that the right belief is the buck stops with you. Now, for me, I'm a bit older. That's a very common phrase. But when I was thinking about that the other day, I thought, oh, I haven't heard it that often these days. But the buck stops with you. So what does that mean as far as unlearning goes? Well, it's the flip side of unlearning. It's the learning bit. Okay. The buck stops with you because we have to, it doesn't matter who is trying to spoon feed us or who is feeding us the data, whether it's ourselves or someone else. We still need to eat it. We need to absorb it. We need to understand it. We need to apply it. Okay. And if we are able to teach ourselves, which is, I believe, the absolute critical skill that we need, and people need to be re-taught if they've forgotten how to do it, is if we can teach ourselves, then we can learn and acquire knowledge at our own speed that suits us, because we all learn differently. Okay. And if we are able to do that, then we become more independent. Then we are building in our own resilience, because if we can learn and we continue to learn, then we continue to grow and we can have continuous growth. We don't get left behind. Okay, we can stay up to date or even get ahead. Or look at another way, given that a lot of people don't do this, anybody doing this is going to get ahead by virtue of the fact that everyone else is standing still and not moving. So, the buck stops with you. It also starts with you. You have to make the choice. Are you going to help yourself, go and learn stuff, unlearn other stuff, or are you going to patiently wait until somebody tells you to do it, somebody helps you to do it, somebody feeds you to do it, somebody teaches you to do it? The choice is yours.
As a final question, I always like to ask my guests to distill, the message into one thing that they want the audience to learn or to remember. And in this case, it's about unlearning. So, Rick, please do us the pleasure of distilling this. Give us one thing that's very important for people to remember.
I'm going to go back to the buck stops with you, or to expand on that, the buck starts and stops with you. All right. As individuals, I think it behooves us to continue to grow and evolve. So, explore, tinker, be curious. Learn how to learn. And if you know how to learn, go and learn stuff. It's a big old world out there, and we don't know a fraction of it. There is so much to learn. Let's go out there and learn it. And by exposing ourselves to more cultures, to more situations, to more models, okay, even business models, the more aware we become, and we can reflect on what we already know. Okay. Now, sometimes it's hard to, we don't change our minds on some things because we're not aware of other perspectives. We're not aware of other models because we don't know it all. And so that's my perspective. I'm not very conventional. You could call me an outlier for sure. I like exploring. I am super curious. I want to know how stuff works. And even if I know how it works, I want to know how it works better. And in fact, if I know how something works already, then that's boring. I've got to find something else. So I am that explorer. But the important thing is, what do you do with all this knowledge? We can choose to sit on it and do nothing, or we can choose to apply it. Okay, we need to take action. We need to advance. It's still, I believe, continuous growth. So that's what to distill things down. The buck starts and stops with each one of us. It's your choice whether you wish to grow or not grow. It's your choice whether you wish to take action or take no action. It's your choice whether you wish to learn and unlearn or whether you wish to not move.
Quite powerful and a powerful ending. So with that, I'd like to thank you, Rick, for joining us for the second time on Evolve. And with the modern pressures on organizations, unlearning is such an invaluable process and way of being. Your insights will certainly support leaders in our audience with starting to seriously consider this as something that's important. So, Rick, can you please tell our listeners how they can connect with you if they want to learn more about, what you offer?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much for that, Yvette. If people want to connect with me, you'll find me if you go to my website, which is my name, just rickyvanovich.com. In addition to that, I'd say just go onto Google or whatever search engine you use and just Google my name. Because in this unusual world, I'm the only person on the planet with that name. So you will find me. Okay?
That's amazing. I didn't even know that happened.
It's still possible. Yvette, I really, really, really thank you again. I'd like to express my gratitude again for having me on your podcast, not once, but 2 times.
Nice. Yes, you're one of the few.
It's really been a fun conversation, and I hope your listeners have enjoyed it as much as I have. Now, and to all people listening in, I really appreciate your time and attention to coming onto this Evolve podcast. And most importantly, I look forward to hearing from some of you, learning from your experiences, maybe unlearning from your experiences, and perhaps sharing more in-depth future discussions. So thank you again, Yvette.
Oh, thank you so much, Rick. This has been Yvette Bethel. I almost said this has been Rick. This has been Yvette Bethel and my guest, Rick Yvanovich. And we would like to thank you again and again for taking the time to join us on Evolve. Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures.
Thank you for listening to Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures. Learn more about our proprietary trust, leadership, and culture courses and certifications at the IFB Academy. You can check them out at organizationalsoul.learnworlds.com.